Schoolteacher is abandoned in Comanche territory. Until a Lakota warrior offers protection, Clara had always dreamed of teaching children. From the moment she could read and write, she understood the power of knowledge. Growing up in a small town in the East, she had watched her own teachers work tirelessly, guiding their students with patience and kindness. But Clara wanted more than to stay in her quiet town. She wanted adventure, purpose, and a chance to make a real difference. When she heard about the opportunities to teach in the Western Territories, she knew this was her calling. The thought of traveling across the vast plains, reaching children who might never have a proper school, filled her with excitement. She imagined classrooms in small frontier towns, children eager to learn to read, write, and understand the wider world. It was a vision that made her heart beat faster and her spirit feel alive. Packing for such a journey was not easy. Clara had to leave behind the comfort of her home, the familiar streets, and the family she loved dearly. She carefully chose what she could carry: a few sets of clothes, books, notebooks, pens, and letters of recommendation from teachers who believed in her. She knew the journey would be long and dangerous. Stories of attacks, wild animals, and harsh weather were everywhere. Friends and relatives tried to warn her. "It's not safe for a young woman alone," her mother had said, worry clear in her voice. But Clara smiled gently and shook her head. "I have to try. If I don't go, who will?" Her father, usually quiet and reserved, had given her a small silver locket. "For courage," he said. "Keep it close and remember that we are always with you, even when we are far away." Early one bright morning, Clara set out. She traveled by stagecoach at first, feeling the rhythm of the wheels against the rough roads. The towns and cities of the East gradually faded behind her, replaced by endless fields, forests, and rivers. With every mile, the landscape grew wilder and lonelier. She often stared out the window, imagining what awaited her on the frontier. The horizon seemed endless, a mix of opportunity and danger. Birds flew high above the plains, and at night the stars shone so brightly that it felt like they were guiding her path. Clara felt a strange mixture of fear and excitement. Every step brought her closer to the unknown. As she traveled further west, the towns became smaller and more scattered. The stagecoach stopped less often, and the people she met seemed wary, hardened by the challenges of frontier life. Clara noticed the differences immediately. The streets were dusty, houses were simple, and the people carried the weight of survival in their expressions. Some greeted her politely, curious about the young teacher traveling alone. Others looked at her with suspicion. It was clear that outsiders were not always welcome in these parts. Still, Clara pressed on, determined to reach the children who were waiting for her. The further she went, the more isolated she became. The roads were rough, often little more than dirt paths winding through tall grass and forests. She learned to read the signs of the land, where water might be found, where animals might roam, and where danger could be near. One day a rider came from the distance, warning travelers to be cautious. "Comanche scouts have been seen near the area you're heading to," he said. Clara felt a chill run down her spine. She had read about the Comanche in history books, but hearing of their presence in real life was frightening. Yet she did not turn back. She reminded herself that her mission was bigger than fear. She had a responsibility to the children waiting for her lessons, to the parents who believed in education, and to herself. By the time Clara reached the edge of a small frontier town, the sun was low in the sky. She was tired, dusty, and unsure of what awaited her next. The town was quiet, with wooden buildings that leaned slightly with age and wind. A few children played in the dirt streets, their laughter bright against the hush of the town. The townspeople eyed her curiously as she stepped off the stagecoach. Some nodded politely, Others whispered to each other. Clara sensed that trust would not come easily here. She had to prove that she was not just an outsider, but someone who genuinely cared about the community. In the town, Clara stayed at a small inn, a simple place with a fireplace and modest rooms. The innkeeper, a kindly woman named Martha, offered her a warm meal and a soft bed. "You'll need all your strength for the journey ahead," Martha said. Clara thanked her and sat by the fire, reflecting on everything she had seen so far. She thought about the children she would teach, the lessons she would give, and the people she would meet. She also thought about the risks. The frontier was unpredictable. She knew that she could face danger at any moment, but she also felt a quiet determination. She had come too far to turn back now. The next morning, Clara prepared for the part of her journey that would take her deeper into Comanche territory. She hired a guide recommended by the townspeople, a man familiar with the trails and the land. At first, the guide seemed trustworthy, but Clara could sense his hesitation. He spoke little, and his eyes darted nervously whenever they passed through the tall grasses or crossed streams. Clara tried to focus on her lessons and her purpose, reminding herself that courage was not the absence of fear, but the decision to move forward despite it. She packed her books carefully, ensuring that each notebook and pencil was safe. These tools would be her lifeline to the children who depended on her. As they traveled, Clara noticed the landscape change. The hills grew higher, the rivers wider, and the grasslands stretched endlessly. The wind whispered through the plains, carrying both beauty and warning. Clara marveled at the wildflowers and the vast skies, but she also remained alert. Every sound, every shadow could signal danger. She began to understand the true isolation of the frontier. Here there were no neighbors to call for help, no nearby towns to offer safety. She was entirely on her own, and she knew it. Yet even in the face of uncertainty, Clara's resolve did not falter. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Clara and her guide made camp near a small creek. The fire crackled, casting flickering shadows across their faces. Clara took out her notebook and wrote letters to her family, describing the journey, the landscape, and her hopes. She wrote about the children she would teach, imagining their faces and their eager questions. Writing calmed her, giving her a sense of connection to home, even as the frontier stretched endlessly around her. The guide sat quietly, sharpening his tools and watching the darkness grow. Clara could feel the tension in the air, a reminder that the land was beautiful but unforgiving. As night fell, Clara lay in her small bedroll, listening to the sounds of the wilderness. Owls hooted in the distance, and the wind rustled through the grass. She felt a mixture of excitement and fear. She was on the edge of the unknown, venturing where few women had gone before. She knew that the days ahead would test her in ways she could not yet imagine. But Clara also felt a quiet thrill. This was the life she had chosen, a life of purpose, courage, and discovery. She closed her eyes, taking a deep breath, ready to face whatever the frontier had in store. Clara awoke before sunrise, the chill of the morning air biting at her skin. The fire from the night before had burned low, and the creek nearby murmured softly, a reminder of how alone she truly was. She packed her belongings carefully, making sure her books and papers were dry and safe. Today would be another long day on the trail, and she knew that caution was as important as courage. Her guide had already saddled the horses, moving silently as if the land itself demanded respect. Clara followed, feeling a strange mix of fear and determination. As they traveled deeper into the plains, the landscape became wilder. The trees grew taller and denser in some areas, while in others, endless grass stretched to the horizon. Birds flew overhead in large, flapping flocks, and the distant sound of running water marked the presence of streams and rivers that could both sustain and challenge travelers. Clara tried to memorize every landmark, knowing that these details might one day save her life if she became separated from the guide. The beauty of the land was breathtaking, yet there was an ever-present edge of danger. She reminded herself that one wrong step could lead to disaster. By mid-morning, Clara noticed the first signs that the territory she was entering was not entirely safe. Small piles of stones arranged oddly along the path suggested someone, or something, had been watching. The guide's eyes narrowed as he scanned the horizon. "We should move carefully," he said quietly, his voice tense. Clara nodded, her heart beating faster. She had read stories of Comanche scouts, skilled and fast, who watched travelers silently before deciding whether to strike or leave them alone. She realized she was now in the land where these stories came to life. The thrill of adventure mingled with real fear, and Clara felt every nerve in her body alert. Hours passed, and the guide led Clara through narrow passes and along winding streams. The sun climbed higher, burning off the morning chill, but the heat was relentless. Clara's throat became dry, and she sipped water from a small canteen, careful not to drink too quickly. Every step seemed heavier than the last, not only because of the rough terrain, but because of the growing sense of isolation. She realized she could not rely on the townspeople or any other travelers. Out here, she was completely on her own, with only the guide and the land for company. By midday, Clara noticed another troubling sign. Tracks in the dirt suggested that others had passed through recently, and the patterns were unfamiliar. The guide examined them carefully. "Comanche," he muttered, his eyes darkening. Clara felt a wave of fear. She knew she could not outrun or fight them if they chose to attack. All she could do was stay alert, follow the guide's instructions, and hope her presence went unnoticed. Her hands tightened around her bag, where her papers and books were safely packed. She thought of the children she was going to teach, and allowed herself a small private prayer for safety. As the afternoon wore on, the guide's behavior became more cautious. He spoke less, moving with careful precision. Clara began to feel the weight of their solitude. The wind picked up, rustling the tall grasses, and she imagined shadows moving in the distance. Every sound was amplified in the quiet plains: the cry of a hawk, the snapping of a twig, even the distant chatter of a stream. Clara realized how fragile human life could be in this vast wilderness. One mistake, one moment of carelessness, and she could be in serious danger. She forced herself to focus on the task at hand, following the guide closely, listening carefully, and moving deliberately. Evening approached, and Clara and the guide needed to find a safe place to camp. They came upon a small clearing near a bend in the river, a spot that seemed hidden from view but had access to water. The guide worked quickly, setting up a small fire and arranging the horses where they could not wander. Clara helped where she could, though her arms ached and her muscles were sore from the day's journey. She began to understand the true physical demands of life on the frontier. It was not enough to have courage. Strength, endurance, and careful planning were equally necessary. As night fell, the darkness seemed to close in around them. The fire's glow cast long shadows, and Clara felt an uneasy shiver run down her spine. The guide, usually so composed, moved with alertness, listening to the sounds of the night. Owls called in the distance, and the occasional rustle of an animal reminded Clara that the wilderness was alive and always watching. She realized she could not rely on luck alone. She had to stay alert, trust her instincts, and follow the guide's advice exactly. One small mistake could mean disaster. The night was restless. Clara tried to sleep, but every sound startled her. The wind carried whispers of unknown creatures, and the distant cry of animals made her imagination run wild. She kept thinking about the Comanche scouts, their keen eyes and quick movements, and wondered what they would do if they noticed her presence. She tried to remind herself that fear could not control her. She had to be brave, focused, and calm. Her dreams were filled with images of children waiting for her, looking to her to bring knowledge and guidance. She clung to that vision as a source of strength. The next day brought new challenges. Their guide became increasingly nervous as they approached an area known for Comanche activity. Clara noticed his hands gripping his tools tightly and his eyes scanning the horizon constantly. She understood that she was truly on her own in hostile territory, dependent entirely on the guide's knowledge and skill. Yet even with his help, the isolation weighed heavily on her. The vast plains offered no comfort, only a constant reminder of how far she had traveled from safety. Clara pressed on, determined not to let fear dominate her spirit. Midday brought a turning point. The guide suddenly halted, crouching low and motioning for Clara to do the same. She looked around, heart pounding, and saw faint figures moving in the distance. Her stomach tightened with fear. The Comanche scouts were near, their presence undeniable. Clara's mind raced, thinking of every lesson she had read about survival, every story of the frontier she had studied. She stayed perfectly still, following the guide's lead, waiting for the threat to pass. Time seemed to stretch endlessly, each minute heavier than the last. Eventually, the scouts moved away, leaving only the wind and the rustling grasses. Clara exhaled slowly, relief washing over her. But she knew the danger was far from over. The guide turned to her, his expression serious. "We cannot linger," he said. "We must move quickly and carefully. There is no room for error." Clara nodded, her mind focused on every step. She realized that survival in the frontier was not about strength alone, but about patience, awareness, and respect for the land and those who live there. Hours later, Clara began to notice the limits of her own endurance. Her muscles ached, her throat was dry, and her spirit felt heavy. The guide seemed aware of her struggle, but offered no comfort beyond brief words of instruction. She understood that in this land, survival depended on action, not comfort. She pushed herself forward, motivated by the thought of reaching her destination, by the promise of the children who awaited her lessons, and by her own determination to succeed. Every step was a test of courage and will. By late afternoon, the guide suddenly stopped, looking uneasy. He pointed ahead, and Clara realized with a sinking heart that the path they had followed was ending abruptly. Rocks and thick undergrowth blocked the way forward. Clara felt a wave of anxiety. They were deep in Comanche territory, isolated, and now faced with an obstacle that could leave them stranded. The guide frowned, muttering about the difficulty of the terrain. Clara realized that the journey was far more dangerous than she had imagined. One wrong decision could trap them, leaving them vulnerable to the dangers she had feared all along. As the sun began to set, Clara and the guide found a small sheltered area among the rocks. It was not ideal, but it offered some protection from the elements and from prying eyes. Clara unpacked her few belongings, arranging them carefully to prevent loss or damage. She thought about the day's events, the close encounter with the scouts, the exhausting trek, and the growing realization that she was entirely alone in the wilderness. She felt a mix of fear, determination, and a strange sense of awe at the raw power and beauty of the land. That night, Clara lay under the open sky, watching the stars twinkle above. She thought of her family, her home, and the children she hoped to teach. The vastness of the plains felt overwhelming, yet there was also a strange comfort in knowing that she had survived this far. She realized that life on the frontier demanded courage, resilience, and an unyielding spirit. She whispered a quiet promise to herself. She would continue, no matter how difficult the path, no matter how dangerous the journey. She would reach her destination, teach the children, and prove to herself that bravery and determination could overcome even the greatest fears. The morning sun rose slowly over the plains, casting a golden light across the tall grasses and distant hills. Clara stirred from her makeshift bed, muscles stiff and sore from the previous day's journey. Her hands ached from holding on to her belongings, and her legs felt heavy from walking through uneven terrain. Yet, despite her exhaustion, she felt a renewed determination. She had survived so far, and she refused to let fear or hardship stop her. Today, she would continue her journey, step by step, trusting in her courage and the guidance of the man who had led her this far. The guide was already awake, examining the land carefully. His eyes darted from one horizon to another, searching for signs of danger. Clara noticed his tension and realized how serious the situation had become. They were deep in Comanche territory now, and the risks were greater than anything she had imagined. Every sound in the distance, the flutter of wings, the rustling of grass, even the distant trickle of water, seemed amplified, signaling potential danger. Clara stayed close, following his lead, and kept her senses alert. Hours passed with little change in the landscape. The vast plains stretched endlessly, with occasional clusters of trees and shrubs breaking the monotony. Clara tried to focus on the beauty around her, the wide open sky and the soft golden waves of grass swaying in the wind. But she could not ignore the unease building inside her. The guide's demeanor grew more cautious, and she noticed how his hands hovered near his tools, ready for any sudden threat. She realized that their journey was not just a test of endurance, but a test of vigilance, awareness, and trust. By midday, Clara's fears became reality. As they rounded a bend near a small stream, she spotted movement ahead. Figures emerged from behind a cluster of trees, their silhouettes sharp against the bright sunlight. Her heart pounded as she recognized the presence of Comanche scouts. She froze, unsure of what to do. The guide immediately crouched low and motioned for her to do the same. Clara followed, her body trembling with adrenaline and fear. She had read about Comanche warriors and their speed, their skill in tracking, and their ability to strike without warning. Now, she understood the seriousness of the threat firsthand. They remained hidden for what felt like hours, the scouts moving silently and skillfully through the landscape. Clara could barely breathe, trying to stay calm while her mind raced with possible outcomes. She thought of her family, the children she hoped to teach, and the life she had left behind. Each thought strengthened her resolve. She could not let fear paralyze her. Survival meant patience, careful observation, and trust in the guide who had brought her this far. Eventually, the scouts moved on, disappearing into the distance as silently as they had appeared. Clara exhaled slowly, relief washing over her in waves. But the encounter left her shaken, and she realized that she could not rely solely on the guide for protection. The wilderness was vast, unpredictable, and full of dangers beyond her imagination. She had to learn to trust her instincts and remain alert at all times. Every step forward would require courage, focus, and careful decision-making. As the day wore on, the guide led Clara to a small ridge overlooking a valley. From this vantage point, she could see for miles the endless plains, winding streams, and distant hills forming a tapestry of wilderness. The beauty was breathtaking, yet it also reminded her of how exposed and vulnerable she was. Out here, there were no towns, no neighbors, no safety net. She was entirely alone in a land that could be both stunning and deadly. Clara's heart swelled with a mixture of awe and determination. She knew that the only way to survive was to stay strong, alert, and adaptable. While taking a brief rest, Clara noticed movement in the distance, different from the scouts they had encountered earlier. This time, the figure approached calmly and deliberately, riding on horseback with a quiet confidence. The guide tensed, sensing something unusual. Clara's heart skipped a beat, unsure whether the newcomer was friend or foe. As the rider drew closer, she could see that he was a Lakota warrior. His posture was steady, his gaze focused, and there was a quiet strength about him that commanded respect. Clara felt a mixture of fear, curiosity, and hope. The Lakota warrior stopped a short distance away, observing them carefully. He did not make any sudden movements, but Clara could feel the weight of his attention. The guide remained tense, wary of this unexpected arrival. Clara's mind raced. Who was he? And what did he want? The warrior spoke calmly in a language she did not understand, and then gestured for them to stay where they were. Clara noticed something in his eyes, a combination of caution, wisdom, and an offer of help. She realized that this encounter could change everything. After a tense moment, the guide spoke to the warrior in quiet tones. Clara could not understand the words, but the tone of the conversation suggested negotiation, assessment, and evaluation. She watched closely as the warrior seemed to agree to something, nodding slowly before turning his attention to her. He gestured again, this time more clearly, indicating that he could help her. Clara felt a surge of relief, though she remained cautious. She had learned that in the frontier, appearances could be deceiving, and trust had to be earned. The warrior approached, maintaining a respectful distance. He spoke softly, using simple words and gestures to communicate his intentions. Clara understood that he was offering protection, guidance, and support as she continued her journey through Comanche territory. Relief washed over her, mingled with a sense of gratitude and cautious optimism. She realized that this unexpected ally could be the key to her survival, providing not only safety but also knowledge of the land, the people, and the dangers she faced. Over the next few hours, Clara and the Lakota warrior began to develop a working understanding. He showed her ways to read the land, to recognize signs of danger, and to move quietly and carefully through the wilderness. Clara learned to observe subtle changes, the way the wind shifted, how animals reacted, and the patterns in the grass and soil. She realized that survival depended not only on courage, but also on awareness, respect for the land, and careful attention to detail. The warrior's guidance was both practical and calming, giving her confidence she had not felt since the journey began. As they traveled together, Clara began to notice the warrior's quiet strength and wisdom. He moved with purpose, speaking only when necessary, yet his presence was comforting. She observed how he respected the land, how he treated animals with care, and how he seemed to understand the rhythm of the wilderness in a way that she could only admire. Clara felt a growing sense of trust, knowing that with his guidance, she had a much greater chance of reaching her destination safely. She also realized that this journey was becoming more than a test of endurance. It was a lesson in courage, respect, and human connection. Night fell, and they made camp near a small grove of trees. The Lakota warrior arranged the horses and prepared a small fire, ensuring that their position was concealed and secure. Clara helped where she could, feeling a growing sense of partnership and mutual respect. That night, under the open sky, Clara reflected on the events of the day. She had faced real danger, felt fear that tested her spirit, and met someone who offered genuine protection in the wilderness. She understood that the frontier was harsh and unpredictable, But she also realized that alliances and trust could make survival possible. As she lay near the fire, Clara felt a sense of calm she had not experienced since beginning her journey. The Lakota warrior sat quietly beside her, maintaining watch over their camp. She observed the stars above, their light steady and reassuring, and thought about the children she hoped to teach, the family she had left behind, and the path she had chosen. The day had been a turning point. Danger had appeared, but guidance and protection had arrived just when she needed it most. Clara allowed herself a small, private sense of hope, understanding that survival and courage were not about facing danger alone, but about recognizing and accepting help when it appeared. The next morning, Clara felt a renewed sense of purpose. She had survived her first real encounter with danger, learned to trust a skilled ally, and discovered the strength within herself to keep moving forward. The Lakota warrior continued to teach her, showing her how to observe subtle signs in the environment, how to move quietly, and how to prepare for unexpected challenges. Each lesson increased her confidence and made her feel more capable in a land that was still full of uncertainty and risk. She realized that courage was not just about facing fear. It was about learning, adapting, and moving forward with determination. By the end of the day, Clara and the warrior had covered a significant distance, avoiding the dangers of Comanche territory with careful planning and skill. Clara's respect for him grew with each passing hour. She recognized his wisdom, his patience, and the quiet strength that allowed him to navigate the wilderness with skill and confidence. She also recognized a growing bond between them, not just of trust, but of shared understanding, respect, and purpose. Clara felt fortunate to have met him, knowing that without his guidance the journey ahead would have been far more dangerous and uncertain. The next morning, Clara awoke to the soft light of dawn filtering through the trees. The air was cool and crisp, carrying the scent of wet earth and the distant flow of the river. She stretched her stiff muscles and packed her belongings carefully, knowing that every step forward was a step deeper into Comanche territory. The presence of the Lakota warrior beside her had become a source of quiet comfort. His calm confidence reminded her that even in the most dangerous places, guidance and wisdom could make survival possible. As they began walking, the landscape around them shifted. The plains gave way to rolling hills, dotted with clusters of shrubs and small trees. The wind whispered through the grass, carrying both beauty and warning. Clara realized that the wilderness was alive with subtle signs, and she needed to learn to read them if she wanted to stay safe. The warrior pointed out broken twigs, footprints, and changes in the earth that indicated the passage of animals or humans. Every detail mattered, and Clara absorbed the lessons with growing determination. The journey was physically demanding. They climbed steep hills, crossed narrow ridges, and navigated through dense undergrowth. Clara's muscles ached, and her hands were sore from gripping her belongings, but she pushed herself forward. The Lakota warrior moved with effortless skill, guiding her around hidden obstacles and pointing out safe paths. She began to understand the rhythm of the land, the way the wind shifted, how animals reacted, and the subtle signs that marked danger. Each lesson gave her confidence, and she felt herself growing stronger, both physically and mentally. By midday, they reached a small stream that wound its way through the hills. The water was clear and cold, and Clara knelt to drink, feeling a refreshing relief as it passed through her parched throat. The warrior taught her how to check the flow and clarity of water, explaining which areas were safe to drink from and which could be risky. Clara realized that every detail, no matter how small, could mean the difference between safety and danger. She marveled at his knowledge, understanding that survival in the wilderness was about more than strength or courage. It was about observation, awareness, and respect for the land. As they continued, Clara noticed signs that they were being watched. The tall grass swayed unnaturally in certain areas, and the distant calls of birds seemed sharper, almost as if they were warning of movement nearby. The warrior crouched low, motioning for her to do the same. Clara's heart raced, and she realized that even with his guidance, the land was unpredictable. Danger could appear at any moment, and they had to remain vigilant. She felt a surge of determination. She had come too far to be paralyzed by fear. She focused on each step, each movement, following the warrior's lead with careful attention. That afternoon, they came across a narrow valley surrounded by steep hills. The valley was beautiful, with wildflowers growing along the stream and sunlight casting golden patterns across the grass. But Clara knew that beauty could be deceiving. The warrior moved silently ahead, scouting the area for signs of danger. Clara followed, learning to move quietly, to observe shadows, and to anticipate changes in the environment. She realized that the journey was as much about mental alertness as physical endurance. Every decision, every step, required careful thought and respect for the land. As evening approached, the warrior suggested they make camp near a small grove of trees that offered both shelter and concealment. Clara helped gather firewood and arrange their supplies, feeling a growing sense of teamwork and mutual respect. The warrior taught her how to set up a safe camp, how to place the fire to avoid attracting unwanted attention, and how to ensure the horses were secure. Clara appreciated the practical knowledge, understanding that these skills were essential not only for survival, but also for her confidence and independence in the wilderness. That night, as they sat by the fire, Clara reflected on the lessons of the day. She had faced challenges she could never have imagined before leaving home: the harsh terrain, the threat of danger, and the constant need for vigilance. Yet she also felt a quiet pride in herself. She had learned, adapted, and survived. The warrior sat silently beside her, keeping watch over their camp, his presence both reassuring and inspiring. Clara realized that she had not only gained a protector, but also a mentor, someone whose knowledge and experience were helping her grow in ways she had never expected. The following days were filled with trials that tested Clara's courage and endurance. They faced sudden storms that drenched them and made the paths slippery and treacherous. They navigated around wild animals, learning to respect their space and recognize warning signs. Each obstacle taught Clara more about the wilderness and about herself. She discovered a resilience she had not known she possessed, an inner strength that allowed her to push through fear and exhaustion. The warrior's guidance remained steady, his calm demeanor and deep understanding of the land providing a source of stability amidst uncertainty. One afternoon, as they traveled along a ridge, Clara noticed fresh footprints in the dirt. Her heart quickened, recognizing them as human. The warrior crouched low, examining the tracks carefully. He whispered instructions, showing her how to move quietly, observe shadows, and anticipate potential danger. Clara followed his guidance, feeling a mixture of fear and excitement. Each successful step through the wilderness built her confidence, and she began to trust her instincts more. She realized that courage was not the absence of fear, but the ability to act wisely despite it. During one particularly challenging stretch, they had to cross a fast-moving river. The current was strong, and the water cold and deep. Clara hesitated, unsure if they could cross safely. The warrior demonstrated the best way to move through the water, pointing out safe footholds and explaining how to maintain balance. Clara followed carefully, her heart racing with each step. When they finally reached the other side, she felt a profound sense of accomplishment. The journey had tested her in ways she had never imagined, and she had emerged stronger and more capable. As night fell, they found another sheltered spot to rest. The warrior maintained his watch while Clara prepared a small meal, her hands moving with growing confidence and skill. She reflected on the journey, realizing how much she had learned, not just about survival, but about trust, patience, and resilience. The bond between her and the warrior had deepened. They were no longer merely traveling companions, but partners, relying on each other for guidance, support, and protection. Clara felt a quiet gratitude for his presence, understanding that his wisdom and skill had been essential to her continued survival. Over the following days, Clara began to notice subtle changes in herself. She moved with more confidence, observed the land more keenly, and trusted her instincts more than ever before. The wilderness, once intimidating and overwhelming, had become a teacher. She had learned to read the signs of danger, to navigate the terrain, and to appreciate the beauty and complexity of the land. The warrior continued to guide her, but she now contributed more actively to their journey, offering insights and suggestions based on her observations. She realized that courage and survival were shared responsibilities built on trust, respect, and cooperation. One evening, as they rested near a quiet stream, the warrior shared stories of his people, the Lakota, their traditions, and their deep connection to the land. Clara listened with fascination, realizing how much she had misunderstood about the lives of the native people before meeting him. She gained a newfound respect for their knowledge, wisdom, and resilience. The stories were more than entertainment. They were lessons in survival, culture, and the importance of living in harmony with the environment. Clara felt a sense of connection not only to the warrior, but also to the wider world she had once known only through books and distant tales. By the end of this period, Clara had transformed. She was no longer the young, inexperienced teacher who had begun the journey. She had faced real danger, learned to navigate the wilderness, and developed a bond of trust and respect with someone whose knowledge was essential to her survival. She understood the importance of patience, careful observation, and humility. The journey had taught her that courage was not about acting recklessly, but about moving forward wisely, with respect for both the land and the people who inhabited it. As they continued westward, the bond between Clara and the warrior remained strong. Each day brought new challenges, new lessons, and new opportunities to grow. Clara realized that this journey was more than a test of endurance. It was a transformation. She had learned to face fear, to adapt, and to survive, and she had discovered the value of trust, guidance, and friendship in a world that could be both beautiful and dangerous. The morning sun rose slowly over the plains, casting a warm golden light across the rolling hills and winding rivers. Clara woke with a sense of anticipation mixed with relief. After weeks of traveling through difficult and dangerous territory, she could finally see signs of civilization in the distance. A small settlement nestled along a river, with smoke rising gently from chimneys and the faint sound of voices carried by the wind. Her heart raced, not with fear this time, but with excitement and hope. She had survived the wilderness, learned from her guide, and formed a bond with the Lakota warrior who had protected her. Now, she was about to begin the next chapter of her journey. As they approached the settlement, Clara noticed the differences immediately. The streets were dusty but orderly, lined with simple wooden buildings. Children ran freely along the roads, laughing and playing, their voices bright and carefree. Adults tended to chores, repairing fences, carrying water, or checking livestock. For the first time in weeks, Clara felt a sense of normalcy. She breathed deeply, taking in the sights and sounds, and allowed herself a small smile. The journey had been long and challenging, but the reward was finally in sight. The Lakota warrior rode beside her quietly, scanning the surroundings for any signs of danger. Though the threat of Comanche scouts had lessened as they neared the settlement, he remained vigilant. Clara noticed how his eyes constantly moved, noting even the smallest details, the position of the people, the movement of animals, the flow of the river. His careful attention reminded her that safety had to be earned, and that even in a place that seemed peaceful, the lessons of the wilderness were never truly forgotten. She felt grateful for his presence, realizing that his guidance had been instrumental to her survival. As they entered the town, a few people stopped to look at the newcomers. Clara could feel their curiosity and perhaps even suspicion. She remembered how she had felt when first arriving in the frontier towns weeks ago. Now, however, she carried herself with confidence. She walked steadily, her head held high, carrying her supplies and her books. She realized that she was no longer the timid, inexperienced teacher who had begun this journey. The wilderness had shaped her into someone stronger, more capable, and more resilient. The townspeople eventually approached them cautiously, offering greetings and assistance. Clara explained that she had come to teach the children of the settlement and described her plans for the school. The adults listened carefully, their expressions shifting from curiosity to admiration. They saw the determination in her eyes and the confidence in her voice. One man, the town's council leader, stepped forward. "It seems you have faced many dangers to reach us," he said. "If you are willing, we would be honored to have you teach our children." Clara's heart lifted. This was the reason she had embarked on the journey: to educate, to inspire, and to bring knowledge where it was needed most. The Lakota warrior remained slightly apart, observing silently. Clara noticed how the townspeople treated him with a mixture of respect and curiosity. She understood that he had been her protector, her guide, and her mentor through the wilderness. Without him, she would never have reached the settlement safely. She felt a surge of gratitude and silently thanked him for his unwavering support. Though words were not needed between them, she knew that the bond they had formed was deep and lasting. Clara quickly set to work preparing the school. She found a small building that had been unused for some time, and with the help of the townspeople, cleaned it, arranged benches, and set up a space for learning. She carefully unpacked her books and materials, arranging them so that the children would feel welcome and inspired. Each step was filled with purpose and excitement. She thought about the long journey, the dangers she had faced, and the lessons she had learned. Now all of that experience would be poured into her teaching, shaping the lives of the children she had come to help. When the first students arrived, Clara felt a mixture of nerves and joy. The children were shy at first, peeking around corners and whispering to each other. Clara smiled warmly, greeting them gently and encouraging them to come forward. One by one, they entered the classroom, eyes wide with curiosity. She began with simple lessons, reading aloud from a book and teaching letters and numbers. The children listened intently, their enthusiasm growing with each passing moment. Clara realized that all the hardships of the journey had been worth it for this very moment, the opportunity to share knowledge and make a difference in their lives. As days turned into weeks, Clara's school became a place of learning, laughter, and growth. The children thrived under her guidance, eager to read, write, and explore the world through books. Parents came to express their gratitude, recognizing the dedication and courage it had taken for her to reach them. Clara felt a deep sense of fulfillment. She had not only survived the frontier, but had also created a space of hope and opportunity for the next generation. Every lesson, every smile, and every moment of progress filled her with pride. Though Clara's life had settled into a new routine, the Lakota warrior remained nearby. He often rode through the settlement, ensuring that the area remained safe and observing the rhythms of daily life. Clara noticed his presence, feeling a quiet comfort in knowing that someone with such skill and wisdom continued to watch over her and the children. Over time, she realized that his guidance had taught her more than survival. It had taught her respect, patience, and the importance of trust. Their bond had grown stronger, built on shared experiences, mutual respect, and the trials they had faced together. One afternoon, Clara walked through the settlement with the warrior by her side. Children ran to greet her, shouting her name and laughing as they showed off what they had learned. Parents smiled and waved, acknowledging her dedication and bravery. Clara felt a profound sense of connection to the people around her. She understood that the frontier had tested her in every way, physically, mentally, and emotionally. But she had emerged stronger, wiser, and more capable. The journey had been difficult, but it had also been transformative, shaping her into the teacher she had always dreamed of becoming.
As the sun set, casting long shadows across the plains, Clara reflected on the journey she had undertaken.
She thought of the hardship she had faced, the isolation, the fear, the threat of danger, and the physical demands of the wilderness. She thought of the Lakota warrior, whose guidance had been essential to her survival, and of the lessons she had learned along the way. Clara realized that courage was not the absence of fear, but the ability to move forward despite it. She understood the value of trust, mentorship, and human connection, and she felt a deep gratitude for the opportunity to make a difference in the lives of others. The warrior, sitting quietly beside her, looked out over the plains with a calm, steady gaze. Clara sensed that he, too, reflected on their journey, on the challenges they had faced and the bond they had formed. Though they had come from very different worlds, they had shared an experience that united them. The frontier had tested them both, and together they had navigated its dangers with courage, skill, and mutual respect. Clara felt a sense of peace, knowing that their paths had crossed for a reason and that their bond would endure, even as life in the settlement became her new normal. Clara continued to teach, each day bringing new lessons, new challenges, and new opportunities to grow. The children flourished under her care, eager to learn and inspired by her dedication. Parents appreciated her courage and commitment, and the settlement gradually became a place of hope and learning, where education was valued and celebrated. Clara realized that the journey had been more than a physical adventure. It had been a journey of personal growth, transformation, and discovery. She had learned about resilience, trust, and the power of human connection, lessons that would stay with her for the rest of her life. Years later, Clara often reflected on the journey that had brought her to this settlement. She remembered the fear she had felt in the wilderness, the danger of being alone in Comanche territory, and the invaluable guidance of the Lakota warrior who had protected her. She thought of the children she had taught, the lives she had touched, and the community she had helped build. Clara understood that her journey had been about more than teaching. It had been about courage, growth, and the bonds that form when people face challenges together. She carried these lessons in her heart, knowing that the strength, wisdom, and trust she had gained would guide her for the rest of her life. And so, Clara's story became one of courage, resilience, and hope. From a young teacher traveling alone into dangerous territory, she had grown into a confident, skilled, and respected figure in the settlement.